Welcome back, Tributes, to episode 56 of Into the Arena. I'm Holly.
And I'm Emily.
And we have a super exciting episode for you today. But before we dive into that, be sure to join us for Tribute Talk. It's on Thursday nights now at 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. We're going to be discussing all the latest Hunger Games news and continue our discussion of Ballad on chapters 7 and 8. So join us for that. And I guess we can just dive right into today's episode. We have Dr. Thomas Paradis. He is a professor of geography and community planning at Butler University in Indiana. He teaches a first-year seminar called Unpacking the Hunger Games, which is why we brought you here. And he is also the author of a book called A Place Called District 12. So we are so excited to have you here today with us, just to kind of talk about your book and the content within the book. So be sure to check out the book afterward. But yeah, we're just so excited to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk about the book and the ballad and the series and whatever you want to discuss.
Yay.
Yeah, we were kind of talking a little bit before and how we found you as I kind of was just like looking on Amazon for any Hunger Games related things, and yours was something that was recently published, and I was super excited to read the book. One, because it was just content I didn't know anything about, both geography and music in the Hunger Games, and it was really cool because it included ballad as well. But yeah, we both really loved your book, so we're super excited to have you on and talk to you.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. Everything I like to do is focus on education, even if it's something that gets published. So I couldn't resist doing a project like that.
Everybody, if you're a Hunger Games fan, you should absolutely check it out. It's such a good read.
You know, I was concerned, still am, I guess, that it's so far past the original trilogy. You know, I had thoughts about, writing something like this, especially initially the geography side of it. But I'm hopeful that some people like you are going to be able to think about, what are the more recent publications online? Because I'm wondering how many people are actually going to be searching for things like that nowadays. But maybe now that the ballad is out, that'll be a good reason for some people to find it.
And with the movie coming out too, I think there's kind of, even just recently in the past month or so, I feel like there's been a bit of a resurgence of interest in the Hunger Games. So I think it's perfect timing.
Yeah, I think we'll see what happens. So I'm glad to contribute, whoever finds it.
So we kind of wanted to start with a little rapid fire series of questions that we do with most of our guests. So if you're ready, what is your favorite Hunger Games book?
I think my favorite book at this point is definitely the ballad. And
cool.
That's
because
awesome.
I've done so much recent kind of scanning of what Suzanne Collins was thinking when she was writing that, and it goes back to District 12, which I love, and the incorporation of so much music, more ballads, of course. Just the whole music and cultural side of it I found really fascinating. And I have to say, I was probably more amused in this book than others. I was finding myself laughing out loud sometimes, especially at Coriolanus's reactions when he was in District 12.
Same.
Yeah.
We're doing a read along, and there's always, every single week, there's lines that we bring up that we think are just hilarious.
Right. Yeah, just the way he reacts at the Hob and those darn mockingjays,
Yeah.
He's driving him nuts. Yeah, I just find it hilarious amidst all of the tragedy and drama that's going on.
So kind of in contrast to that, what is your favorite movie of the series?
I kind of waffle on that. I'll go back and forth. It's got to be between the original Hunger Games film and Catching Fire. I really enjoyed both of those films. And even though they were produced with two different directors, I feel that they both were right on the money in various ways, for what Hollywood can do for books. I'm often not a fan of taking books and turning them into relatively simplified 2-hour movies overall. But I've always had fun with all 4 of the movies at this point, but I think I really enjoy. I probably watched The Hunger Games and Catching Fire more than the other 2.
Yes,
Yeah,
me too.
Same. Who would you say is your favorite Hunger Games character?
That's a tough one. And obviously Katniss gets a lot of attention, and she was the one that intrigued me the most when I first discovered the Hunger Games films, even before I knew there was a trilogy. I bumped into the movie one time by accident. So, aside from Katniss and all that she represents in the series, I've got to go with someone like Beetee.
Okay.
He just kind of resonated with me. He's an educator at heart. he's got the tributes on the beach, and he does a Q&A back and forth. It's like, why are we here? And what do you think is going to happen next? And he just turns into teacher mode.
Okay, I can see that. That's a cool answer.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, he's got that scientific mind, which I can relate to, so it's just kind of fun.
Who would you say is your least favorite Hunger Games character?
Oh, I tell you, that's an easy one for me. And well, for me, it's Romulus Thread, the new overseer.
Yeah, I can see that.
Peacekeeper. Yeah, he has absolutely, the way he's portrayed at least, has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. He's got little to no compassion. He's too mean. He's too aggressive. It's just not my type of guy.
Yeah.
We always talk about how we love the actor in the movie, his portrayal of that character, though, where he shoots off the gun, clear the square.
Clear the square.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, to me, was scary too. It was just so aggressive, and
he's so scary. Yeah.
I preferred the previous peacekeepers who kind of went to the Hob and traded with Katniss, and kind of had more of a personality about them.
So what district would you say that you're from?
I probably don't really know. If you look at all the fan maps that have been done out there, there's a lot of creative approaches to understanding Panem's geography, which is one reason I got interested in the series. I'm not really sure where Indiana is located in this. It could be one of the industrial districts, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who really knows? I've looked at a few of the different maps that are out there, and they're all over the place. The Midwest can be part of even District 11, the northern regions of it, perhaps. I'm going with somewhere in the middle range of the industrial and agricultural heartland.
Okay.
District 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there.
It'd be so nice if Suzanne just gave us a concise map, but
that's right. We all know that's not her style, though, don't we?
No, no, not at all. So what would you say is your favorite ballad or song from the series, since you're so into the music aspect of it?
I like a few of the ones, of course, that Suzanne Collins apparently wrote for this, like the one that Lucy Gray sings at the reaping, adding that tone to the whole thing. It's like, yeah, here we've got a performer, we've got a singer. Probably my favorite song, though, because I've been teaching in the course that I have at this point, is Keep on the Sunny Side, that Maud Ivory belts out during the during the drama that's happening in the shed next door. The keep on the sunny side is the foil, right, to what's happening on the other side. Everything in the Hob is positive and happy, and people are singing, but not next door in the shed. Keep on the Sunny Side relates to kind of the history of early country music, and that's something that I've researched for this book, and it's an actual song. So people who may not have done a lot of research yet on the songs within the ballads or within the original series, for that matter, may not realize that some of these songs are original to the country music industry, and they were out there in the 1920s, 30s, or 40s. And Suzanne Collins pulled those in as kind of part of that music heritage, and I'm sure for very specific reasons. So anyway, I think Keep on the Sunny Side kind of reflects a lot of what was going on in the early country music industry.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that if they keep it in the movie too, because I think it's just going to be such a good moment to actually hear that music, like you said, when all the drama is going down. So I think it's going to be great.
That's one of the few movie scenes I can almost imagine in my head now.
So cinematic.
Absolutely. You can hear it playing next door and everybody singing, and then here's the drama going on next door. So I think it's going to be fun. And
our last rapid fire question: do you think that Lucy Gray is alive or dead at the end of Ballad?
Okay, so with the situation of Lucy Gray, I think she's alive.
Ooh, okay.
I'm 98% sure of that. Okay, so
love this.
That level of confidence. Now, certainly she disappeared, and I get, we can talk more later if you want about this.
Okay.
Certainly she disappears at the end. We are not given much information on what happens to her, but I don't see much evidence whatsoever that she was actually killed within the series, within the ballad, the book. That's my take anyway.
Emily and I are avid Lucy Gray is dead believers.
Yeah, we're so convinced she's dead. So we're gonna have to talk more about that.
Yes.
That sounds great.
I guess we'll just dive into our regular discussion with you.
Okay.
The first question that we have is, can you share how you became a fan of the Hunger Games and what led you to eventually teach a class and writing a book about the series?
It's an interesting story for me. So I mentioned earlier that I discovered the original Hunger Games movie, by accident, and I had heard scuttlebutt about the book. Yeah, we were on an international flight. I think it was the first time I was teaching abroad in Italy, and needed something to do on the plane. So pulled up the movie options on our seat and saw the Hunger Games there. I thought, I've heard kind of some scuttlebutt about this. I hear it's about kids killing kids, and I wasn't that too interested in I hadn't heard much positive about it at the time. So anyway, I watched the film just out of curiosity, probably captured 2/3 of it with the engine noise and all the other distractions. I came away thinking, first of all, there's got to be something more after this, because it just kind of stopped. Just kind of ended. I found it fascinating, though. I found Katniss's character intriguing. The fact that we had a female protagonist running through the forest, trying to survive and finding ways to do that creatively, using survival skills, that really clued me into this. I'm like, this is interesting. So later on, long story short, I found out that, of course, there's the series. And I spent probably several months going through the series at least 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
Falling in love
Okay.
with the series itself and understanding better where the movie came from. And then that's how I got latched onto it. I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on here to be interpreted. So that led eventually to a conference that I envisioned and had several other colleagues at Northern Arizona University, where I was. We had a 1.5-day conference just on the Hunger Games, and it was the year that Catching Fire was coming out. And so we had this conference scheduled just before the release of Catching Fire in November. So there was a lot of buzz with the movies at that time. And we had hundreds of students show up for these things. We had sessions all day. V. Arrow, right, author of
Oh,
The
yeah.
Playing Companion, she came out and she was our kind of keynote speaker. We had 35 or 40 faculty members giving presentations or discussions. So it was a blast. And
That's
so,
a
Wow, wish
dream.
I'd known.
Yeah.
yeah, it was just something unique. And all the disciplines, what I get excited about is that all the different academic disciplines can get involved in this series in some way. Certainly all the liberal arts and sciences, but then also the pharmaceuticals, pharmacy, which we have extensively here at Butler, the business disciplines, looking at how business and political science get into all of that. So there's a lot to discuss from a wide number of perspectives. My geography and urban planning is just part of that.
I would love a book just like yours from like every different discipline that we can approach the Hunger Games from. I think that would
Right.
be great.
Well, we've got political science out there, philosophy, there are some others, right? You're probably aware of, which I do use in my class. Well, when you asked about the class as well, I've had a blast putting this together and revising it every year I revise something with the course. But I mean, how much fun is it to be able to teach 2 semesters each year? So fall and spring.
Yeah.
On
Yeah, a
something like
whole
the
year
Hunger
of the
Games.
Hunger Games.
It
Sign
is.
me up.
Which is it's kind of interesting, because the first couple of years here at Butler, I tried it for 1 semester. I volunteered to take over for a colleague who couldn't teach the course for the full year, right? And he was doing another topic. And so I literally came in to introduce myself and say, guess what we're doing next spring? So we're going to look at the Hunger Games, and their eyes got all wide, and it's like, whoa. So that's how I got started, kind of pinch hitting for another professor. And it's like, let's give this a shot. Since then, I've discovered that a lot of the students don't really know much about the series anymore. It's almost becoming like a historical literary series where I have to worry about spoiler alerts now. I mean, even with Mockingjay, I'd say,
geez.
like, even this year, a half to a third of the students maybe really didn't know what happened at the end of Mockingjay. They either didn't remember or they didn't see all the movies. So they might have seen 1 or 2 of the films. They might have read 1 or 2 of the books. I might have a couple of super fans in there. I usually get a couple who have read the whole series. They've seen all the movies. They kind of know what's going on. And this year I've got 2 students who actually read the ballot, right? So, but not many. So it's kind of funny and it's fun because they're not coming in with all this preconceived knowledge and notions of what the series means and everything. And I warn them at the beginning. I say, we'll do our best with spoiler alerts, but this has all been out there for a long time. So I make it clear, things are going to come out in my writing and everything you see on the web. I do try to protect them from the ballot, however, and it worked very well. So this year is the second year I had my students read the ballot. So we do that in the second semester. And I kind of wrap the second semester now around that book.
That's awesome.
Sounds so fun.
It is. So they just finished reading that. we took 3 weeks to do that. So they do each part, one part for each week. And they also have other reading reflections, assignments, and things like that they tie into their actual academic work, right? They're learning how to do more research. They're learning how to present more formally, with oral presentations, and of course, writing, lots of writing.
That's a class I want to take. When I heard about this class, I was like, sign me up. I'm sad that I didn't get to attend.
It's interesting though, even for the first few years, the students almost get tired of the Hunger Games after a while, and they kind of think, okay, it's been almost 2 semesters, it's time to move on. And so the last projects I have them do in the course relate to some related topic. It could be Appalachian development, for instance, and that's what we're going to do this semester. I think it worked well last year. Or they do some other analysis on another dystopian novel, which they might have seen in the past or not know much about. And so we kind of migrate away from the Hunger Games at the end of this spring semester and start focusing kind of more on their connections in reality to the real world, I guess. We've kept them engaged, especially with the prequel lately, and it's worked out really well.
So I kind of want to start getting into the book.
Sure.
One of the things while reading, well, there's a lot of things that just surprised me or stood out to me, but you talk about Katniss's father. You were saying that he's kind of an underrated character, I guess. You kind of explain or make the argument that he's really one of the most influential characters in the series.
Yeah, absolutely. So Katniss's father, to me, is the most important character who's not alive in the series. I guess that's how we should put it. If it wasn't for Katniss's father, she would not have developed many of these skills. Now, some things she developed on her own, of course, later on as she grew up, and other people were involved in that, like Gail and her mom and so forth. But no, it's her father that really had her out there at a very young age, getting used to the woods, getting used to the kind of forest environments, out to the lake. I mean, he was teaching her how to swim at what, age 3? He had her out there very early on. Could you imagine him doing the same thing with Prim?
Right, exactly.
What do they say, right? They joke, right? Can you imagine Prim in the woods? Like, no.
Yeah.
Nothing against Prim, of course. She has all these other talents. But, Katniss, for whatever reason, her father kind of pegged her as the one to take on these skills, to learn survival, to learn to be self-sufficient. And that was true in the woods with hunting and gathering and all that, just as much as it was in town. When she was old enough, her father has her coming into the Hob, which is a scary situation for kids, right? But he had her learn about the people in the Hob and the way that informal market works. And they got used to Katniss being around, so that later on, when she had to come in on her own, she might have been nervous about it, as she mentions, but she could navigate her own way through that system, I guess, and make important contacts and friends, like Greasy Say and so forth. Most fathers, if you have a forest behind your house, they might help you build a tree house and might play hide and seek and that sort of thing. But this guy was on a mission. He was really intent on having Katniss become self-sufficient in a number of ways. And I think it's probably because he foresaw that he may not survive. If he was involved in any initial rebellious activities, he may not have survived that. And he wanted to make sure Katniss could help take care of the family over time. And of course, she was the older sister, which made sense as well. So that's my sense. He was on a mission. My sense is to make sure she would be self-sufficient if something happened to him.
Do you think it ever crossed his mind that maybe this could also prepare her to go into the Hunger Games if she was ever chosen as well? Because it seems like maybe that could be reasoning as well.
Yeah, I mean, he knew about the Hunger Games, of course, and that there's always a chance his kids could end up being a part of it somehow. So it makes sense that might be a side benefit, to learning all these skills. My guess, though, is he probably didn't think there was much of a chance that they would be reaped. I think it was more of a side benefit. He's like, okay, if they ever get into the games, at least Katniss will be somewhat prepared to take care of herself. Sure, I think it probably would have crossed his mind. I don't see why it wouldn't have.
Yeah.
I think the primary rationale, though, my sense was to make sure she and her family could survive.
Did you have any thoughts on, because you posed the question, how did Katniss's father learn his skills in the woods? Also,
Right.
there's Gail's father, and
Mhm.
how did he learn his skills? Like, were the two of them
Mhm.
friends? I don't know. Did you have any kind of thoughts or theories about that?
So we know that Gale and Katniss, their fathers knew each other in the mines, right? So, and they had
Right.
ample time to communicate down in the mines, also with their own peers. And of course, the favorite fan theories out there that I see that I probably agree with is that something was going on in the mines where they could communicate, without the oversight of the Capitol so much. There was probably something brewing in the mines that the Capitol eventually got wind of. So I'm not convinced that the mining accident was actually an accident. A lot of fans out there would support that. It's like, it's probably not just a simple mining accident like did happen in reality, right? In Appalachian mining communities and elsewhere around the world. It was fairly common to have accidents and explosions like that. In this case, there's just a lot of suspicion around it. And sure, Gail's father was likely friends, probably knew Katniss's father. And, both of those families had to fend for themselves, learn to take care of themselves after their fathers were gone. So it's very possible that they had been learning their own skills in the woods together at some point and knew each other early on. I would bet that's the case. So there's some history there. It would be fun if there's another prequel book coming out eventually to see if Suzanne Collins fills in any of that detail.
There's this generation above Katniss and Prim and Gale that I feel like
Mhm.
Suzanne has so much information about that she just never told us. And then it's funny how we kind of then go even further to the generation before that with Ballad, and still there's so much information that, like, please write another book, Suzanne. Give us more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this huge generation gap, and I think my guess is there are plans for another book. It looked
Ooh.
like, I mean, that's my guess. Just based on all the breadcrumbs and everything that she leaves out of the prequel, there's got to be more than this. But of course, that's wishful thinking, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm not
We say
optimistic,
the
but
same thing.
I'm confident there's another book. There are a lot of breadcrumbs or Easter eggs, whatever you want to call it, that I learned to see in the original series now that kind of point to the prequel. You can tell she had plans for a future book, whether or not she may not have known when that was going to get published. I mean, it took her 10 years, to get this one done, right? So, I mean, who knows
yeah.
when or if it's going to happen. But there's a lot of information that I think is deliberately left out of the series. So Katniss knows, if she knows nothing about her grandparents, that's really strange. She tells us nothing about her grandparents. She tells us we do not learn the names of her father or her mother. That's why we keep referring to them this way. She didn't know anything about the original victor to the Hunger Games that we know about now. Yeah, my guess is Suzanne Collins has this all mapped out. Like one of those CSI walls, they're doing a private investigation and the wall's got all these photographs and maps and everything on. They're trying to figure out what's going on. That's what I envision Suzanne Collins. She's got this wall at her house, right? She's got the whole plan for the story.
Well, I guess one of those pieces on the wall is the lake, because the lake appears in every book of the series.
Yes.
So can you talk a bit more about the importance of the lake and its relationship with different generations of characters?
Yeah, sure. It's one of my favorite places in the series because it's kind of like Katniss's happy place, right? In a way.
Mhm.
And Gale and others, and now the Covey, of course. And so, isn't it amazing that the Covey is so familiar with the lake in the woods? And later on, Katniss becomes just as familiar with that. And Gale, right? And so a lot of dialogue happens out there at the lake in the original series, just as it does in the ballad. And so this is certainly not a coincidence. And of course, we know that Katniss's father is very familiar with the lake and its surroundings as well, because that's where Katniss learned to swim. And she recalls those early days with her father out there at the lake and in the woods. And so you're right. All three of these generations have some kind of history and kind of a deep place attachment, as geographers call it, kind of this attachment to place. They have an emotional attachment to the lake. It's an important place for them. The Covey go out there to relax and just enjoy nature and the sun and everything. They end up dragging Coriolanus along, as nervous as he is. He's not a nature guy, but they drag him along anyway. So, and he starts learning about, their perspectives, like, how do you know where this place is and everything? The lake forms this continuity throughout the series and the prequel and kind of links those three generations.
Such a shame we don't get to see that in the films, really,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it is so important. And then now they're, making Ballad, and I'm assuming that Lake is going to be in there, but might not necessarily have that connection because it wasn't in the original films.
Do you ever wonder why Snow never went back and did something with that house at the lake? Like, that's a question I always wonder is like, wouldn't you want to get rid of that?
That's an interesting thought. They could make for a good summer cottage for him, right?
Yeah.
It'd probably be beneath him.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, we don't really know if he ends up going back to District 12 at all, either on an
True.
official business or things like that. My guess is he probably just wants to stay far, far away from that place.
Yeah, you would kind of think he would, I don't know, get rid of that or get rid of the hub or kind of, I don't know, destroy these places.
I think he realizes that too late, right? So by the end of Catching Fire, when he actually has the District 12 firebombed, he's probably thinking to himself, I should have done this a long time ago.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Kind of let it get out of hand before that.
So one other thing that you talk about in the book is the relationship between early Panem and capitalism. So do you think that Snow instigated the change because of his own negative experiences with capitalism and the system that it was before?
That's
kind
an
of like the
interesting
Plinths. I
question.
mean, they moved from District 2 to the capital, and he hates that. So he wouldn't want that to happen again. And we never see that happen again. And then, of course, losing his fortune. But we don't see that change from capitalism to the more authoritarian government, but assume that it happens and that he's probably the instigator.
That would make sense to me. No, I don't know if it's so this shift from capitalism into this very draconian dictatorship, this authoritarian regime that we end up seeing in the trilogy. There's a huge gap there in the series, which once again leads me to believe there's more coming if Suzanne Collins continues her trends. We don't know Snow's next step. We don't know how he really becomes president and why he takes such drastic actions to essentially close the country down, right? Turn it into an authoritarian dictatorship with so few freedoms remaining, right? So few liberties, so little communication, and you need permission just to travel anywhere. That's very serious. There are only a couple of places on Earth right now that have that level of authoritarianism. But in the ballad, isn't it fascinating that you can still travel by conventional railroad train, right? You're still thinking you're in the early 1920s or 1940s period when rail travel was the way to get around the country. The United States at one point had the best railroad system in the world, along with the worst roads, right? So we flipped that around over the last 60 or 70 years, for better or for worse. And I just found it fascinating in the ballad that Suzanne Collins gives us this early Panem that really reflects kind of 1940s era United States.
Yeah, it feels a lot more familiar.
Still had freedom. Yeah, there are freedoms to move about the country. And even Coriolanus takes the train for a few days trip from the capital out to District 12 in the east, which is what it would take. It would take a few days. He sees all of these ruined cities along the way, thinking what a waste of all that effort. So it's hard to tell later on what gets into his mind. He's got to be really disappointed when he discovers that District 13 was actually still around.
Yes.
I mean, he's led the yeah. I mean,
I found that comment so funny in your book about that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, talk about getting duped. I mean, boy, he's got egg on his face. And here he is surviving childhood and getting through all of these issues with his family and wondering where his next fortune is going to come from, and to realize that, District 13 really wasn't destroyed in the first place.
Just bad luck.
I mean, there wasn't even a fence around District 12 at that time, right? So there was a lot more freedom, a lot more ability to move and communicate in that early Panem that we see in the ballad, which as a geographer really fascinated me.
Well, I think it's also interesting that you're bringing up like 1940s America too, because I don't know if you've followed any of the behind the scenes photos that are coming out of the set of Ballad, but they're going with the 1940s look, which I think is really interesting as well.
Well, that's going to be interesting, as you say, because I've only seen a few snippets of scenes, some of the fan sites or whatever, that I happen to come across. I haven't done much research on it yet, but I'm realizing there's been so much done with the film already in production that I should probably be paying more attention to it. So I may have my students actually do some research on it. I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate that into an upcoming project for theirs. I think they'll be interested in that. I did find out something I'm a little concerned about, and that is some of it's being filmed in Germany, like even a District 12 is being filmed in Germany.
Germany and Poland. Germany was for
yes.
most of the district scenes.
And I saw some kind of sign that they had in one of those photos. It looks very much kind of Soviet-esque, like one of those propaganda signs from the Soviet Union. It seems like they're going with that sort of imagery, which is interesting. So I'll be curious to see why they're filming over there and not here in the Appalachians, not here in the United States. That's kind of a red flag for me. But we always find out what the reasoning is later on.
I feel like it's because mostly the Capitol architecture that they wanted to film with was in Germany, and then probably just for cost reasons they couldn't do half the production there and half the production over in the States. But I kind of like some of the places that they've picked out visually for District 12. I don't know. I'm excited to see how it's going to look.
That's great. Yeah, I'll have to see more about what they're doing, because honestly, I really haven't paid much attention to it yet.
Well, I guess based on your discussion of ballads in Appalachia, where would you argue Lucy Gray and the Covey are actually from? Because, I mean, we talk about this, we do Tribute Talk, which is our group of friends. Every week we read some ballad chapters and talk about them with friends. But I don't know, I've been thinking like maybe she could have came from the capital only because of like the makeup she had, or she could have come from a district that provided her the makeup that she wore to the reaping. So I'm just curious, like, where you think that they're originally from.
Okay, so there's some clues to this, not from a specific place, but a specific region. I'm convinced that Lucy Gray and many of the Covey, combined families, I guess, are from somewhere else in the central or southern Appalachians.
Okay.
And
all right,
the main reason for that is the way she introduces herself early on in the Capitol. She mentioned something about, I'm not from District 12, or just from somewhere else, doesn't say. However, first of all, her singing style, her knowledge of songs, her knowledge of ballads points her to the central or southern Appalachians because of the kind of that original Scots-Irish, Anglo-Celtic, I guess, ballad tradition that infused into the Appalachians, during the 1700s. And so Suzanne Collins, I think, is pointing to a lot of that heritage in the whole series and within the ballad as well. That's something else we could talk about. But Lucy Gray is obviously very adept at knowing this type of music, knowing the styles of ballads, and she writes her own ballads. So that's an Appalachian thing in general. Okay, so that would be my guess. And she says, where I'm from, at one point, this is an old song, an old tune that I learned, and this was a pretty typical type of song where I'm from. So given Suzanne Collins' clear focus on the Central Appalachians and this history of balladry and folk songs within the Appalachian region, that to me is a clear sign that Lucy Gray isn't from too far away. They're from the Appalachians somewhere else. I'd like to add something else to that, though. You mentioned about possibly coming from the capital, and I don't think so. I wouldn't bet that she is from the capital or her family. However, I find it fascinating that her mannerisms, the mannerisms of the Covey, their ways of speaking and so forth, even Coriolanus points it out, I guess, through the narrator, right, who's telling the story. She could get by in the capital because they know a lot of the manners. I think Effie would probably be impressed with them, right?
Maybe they traveled through there.
Maybe. I think that's one of those breadcrumbs or something that Suzanne Collins is dropping. I mean, even the bar owners there in the ballad, in the story, think that Lucy Gray would be great, right, to have her entertained in the bar at his restaurant or whatever. So yeah, there's some connection there. We don't know what it is yet. And maybe Lucy Gray ends up going back to the capital. We just don't know that.
One of my favorite things from reading the book was just learning, how much of a genius Suzanne is. And I already thought that, but just seeing all of the detail that she goes into. One thing was how specific she was in choosing the instruments for the Covey and then learning about all the different instruments. Could you actually just explain the part from the book about Billy Tope?
Okay.
Because I love that part.
He's an interesting character, right? So he is, essentially shunned from the Covey, and he's Clerk Carmine's brother. So there's family connection there, and he was clearly a part of the Covey, and he's being essentially pushed out of it. In classic style of Suzanne Collins, she gives us clues about what instrument he plays, but she doesn't just tell us right out in the open.
Of course
And
not.
it's clear to me that he plays the accordion. It's this kind of wheezing instrument. Yeah, it's described that way. It's a big box with keys on it. I mean, what else could that be? And it's interesting that early bluegrass bands incorporated the accordion once in a while, not very often, but it could be part of that bluegrass genre. The accordion could be integrated into the string bands of the Appalachians. And some of the more famous bluegrass bands did just that. They had accordion players, but it wasn't common and it wasn't necessary for traditional bluegrass music, just as Billy Tope is not a necessary character, we might surmise, to be a part of the covey. So it's almost like the accordion is a metaphor for his not being entirely necessary to be a part of the covey as this story plays out.
I love that detail.
Okay, well, good.
One of the instruments that you said is kind of more vital or common, I guess, in bluegrass music is the banjo, but then no one in the covey plays the banjo. So I think you were kind of theorizing that maybe someone was part of the covey and no longer is, or passed away. I was thinking maybe her mother could have played the banjo. I think that could be like an interesting theory that maybe makes sense, because we know that she made it to District 12 and then somehow passed away. I don't think the book ever says, but just a theory that I'm throwing out there that maybe she played the banjo.
It could be, and it makes sense that coming from a musical family, which was very common in the Appalachian region, that sometimes every family member played or is expected to play an instrument, right? And so it makes good sense that Lucy Gray's parents, at least one of them, played either a banjo or some other acoustic instrument, that would have fit in well with mountain music. At the time.
I would think they would have to be musical as well to have kind of started that.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, that sort of thing gets passed down, generation to generation as well, quite often, especially late 19th into early 20th century. Well, throughout the 20th century, really, the great string instrumentalists of the mid to late 20th century can point several generations back, right, to how they got involved in music. Yeah, that to me is clear that, a lot of members of the Covey family have disappeared, unfortunately. They were killed, as Lucy Gray details. So they've seen a lot of tragedy too. And so, yeah, here you're left with this ragtag bunch of kids, trying to make a living on their own. Kind of, it's instead of sustainable farming or that sort of thing, they're playing music for the people that can afford it, right? Back to your question about the instrumentation and the banjo, my suspicion is this. So there's 4 primary instruments now, okay, in the covey. Those primary instruments are the mandolin, the bass, the guitar, of course, with Lucy Gray, and the fiddle. And so those are the 4 primary instruments that are known in traditional bluegrass circles as being the 4 instruments that you really need. Now, you might be able to get away with losing 1 or 2 of those instruments, adding in 2 fiddles or 2 guitars or something like that, right? So there's flexibility there. But when I did a little research on this, I discovered, isn't it a coincidence or not, that really the first true bluegrass band that's considered performing the bluegrass genre, basically starting in 1939. It was Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys. And he kind of took the stage by storm, performing some of those relatively old folk songs at a pretty fast clip. And that became known as the bluegrass genre over time. It wasn't known as bluegrass yet, but eventually it became known later on as kind of this bluegrass genre on its own. So anyway, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys had precisely that instrumentation. It was the first group to do this. They had the covey on stage. They had the bass, they had the guitar, they had the fiddle, and the mandolin. And Bill Monroe, interestingly, was a master of the mandolin. Okay, so when you're looking at Tam Amber, I guess, and his mandolin skills, being the finest picker alive, as Maude Ivory tells us, that tells me that's like a nod to Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys.
Cool.
So that's my sense of it. We don't know because Suzanne Collins hasn't told us in canon or within her interviews, but I think she wanted us to do some research on the history of bluegrass music, and it kind of makes sense. That original group did not include a banjo. Okay, so that's my suspicion as to why Collins did not include a banjo in her Covey instrumentation. The other side of it, I mean, the banjo has a kind of dark history in terms of being appropriated for the minstrel shows of the 19th century and well into the 20th century, making fun of African Americans on stage and that sort of thing. The banjo was originally an African instrument. Okay, it came over with African slaves, and it was the way they entertained themselves. And the banjo eventually, and they had different names for it. But the history of the banjo has kind of a contradictory history here in the United States. And I'm wondering if she decided not to include it for that reason, but I don't think that was it. I don't think Suzanne Collins was too concerned with that troubling past with the banjo. I think it was more, she's nodding to another historic group that contributed to the music history of the Appalachians, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys.
It's so cool.
The detail that she puts into this and the detail that you picked out of it, I think is amazing that so many people are going to skip over. That's why your book is important to read.
Well, thanks. Honestly, I've had so much fun deciphering Suzanne Collins' writing, and I'm not a big literary fan. I mean, I was reading Cliff's Notes, right, to understand Shakespeare. I mean, years ago. So what she writes, she's got so much packed into this, just looking for the breadcrumbs, looking for the clues, what is she meaning? What is she doing? It's just been a blast to do that sort of thing.
And then I guess speaking on the history of music too, can we talk a little bit more about The Hanging Tree and its relationship to Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit?
Oh, sure.
Because I thought that was a really fascinating part, and how the ballad may have served as an invitation to revolt for the coal miners of District 12.
I have to give credit where credit is due. I've learned my background on Strange Fruit and kind of the roots of the Hanging Tree and things like that owed to other people who have written about it. So for instance, John Granger has his own popular blog out there. He's, I guess, known as the Dean of Hogwarts, or the Dean of Harry Potter. And he's written, I found my information on the Hanging Tree originally from him, because he wrote about it way back when, before the movies came out, I think. He suggested that, somebody in his generation, he was writing that, he says, you can't be in my generation and not think about Strange Fruit when you're thinking about the Hanging Tree. So he immediately jumped to that connection. And that's how I learned more about Strange Fruit, and I've heard it on YouTube and various performances and so forth. I mean, basically it's a protest song, right? It's one of those protest songs, especially in that case during the civil rights movements, so the 1960s and so. That's what John Granger was associating the Hanging Tree with, kind of as one of these protest songs or protest ballads. And so certainly, we can make the connection that the Hanging Tree was viewed in District 12 as one of these protest songs that might in some ways instigate rebellion or an uprising and that sort of thing.
Seemed why Mrs. Everdeen was so afraid of it.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really interesting exchange that happens. Actually, it's one of my favorite parts, I think, of Mockingjay, when Katniss is looking back again, as she often does, to her early days. She's very nostalgic, right? She goes back to her old home days, and when Dad was on the floor, helping them make ropes, like nooses out of rope. And of course, the girls didn't know what they were doing, but here's Prim and Katniss on the floor, and you just imagine this scene, and he's teaching them the Hanging Tree song, and they're singing, and well, here comes Mom. You can imagine the hands on her hips saying, "What are you doing? What do you guys think you're doing?" Getting mad at the husband, right? And it's like, we can't sing that song. What are you having them do? I mean, she just flies off the handle the way she describes it. It's like, that song has been banned. We're not allowed to sing that. You're going to get us in trouble. So it's very clear that Katniss's mom, coming from the merchant class, remembers that song and the fact that it was banned early on. So there is a heritage there that District 12 is still aware of in some way. And of course, Katniss's father, the guy he is like, this is okay. We're going to teach you the Hanging Tree. So this is how Katniss learns the song. And so obviously he knew the song and had it passed down from someone before, which we may find out who that is eventually.
I mean, I guess that kind of relates to our next question is, you have a theory that Maude Ivory and Katniss are related. I know that when the book first came out, everyone thought that Lucy Gray was related to Katniss, but what are your thoughts and theories behind that?
So I've thought through this with Lucy Gray. There are several reasons that I can understand people might see some connection there. So And honestly, it's a work of fiction, so people are free to believe what they wish. The clues that I'm seeing show up in the ballads that kind of point back and forth to the series. I'm seeing more of the connection with Maud Ivory. And the reason is Maud Ivory is the one who's essentially expected to take over the covey. Whether or not Lucy Gray hangs around, Maud Ivory, first of all, I've done the math. If you look at generations as being about 25 to 27 years, it makes sense. Maud Ivory is about 8 in the ballad. So add 25 or so years, she could easily have Katniss's father, and then Katniss's father will be 25 to 30 or so when he has Katniss. So the generational thing makes sense mathematical wise. Beyond that, there are a lot of codes or clues about similar character traits. So Maud Ivory can remember anything with a tune, just hearing it once, right? Lucy Gray tells us that. And that's why she's singing, the song from the Capitol, because it's a code to Maud Ivory in the covey. She says, don't worry about it. Maud Ivory, my cousin can remember this, after hearing it once. Well, Katniss is the same way. Katniss can remember a tune right after she's learned it as well. We learned from Peeta originally that, she was the one, Katniss was the one to stand up when she was young on the desk or whatever and in school and belt out the Valley song. And Katniss is the one who remembered the hanging tree from a very young age. And so there's a lot of different connections there that would make sense between those. Now, it may not be a direct connection with Maud Ivory. Perhaps there's another family member, some other connection with the family tree there that we're going to learn about. Suzanne Collins is famous for her twists, right? So just when we think we've got something figured out, she provides another surprise. So I wouldn't be surprised there. But no, there's such a strong connection between the lake and the covey and all of their knowledge and the hanging tree and all of that clearly gets passed down to her father, who passes it down to them.
We're with you. We agree that there's a
It's
connection
Maud.
from Maud Ivory to Katniss for sure.
I guess to kind of loop back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, you mentioned that Lucy Gray, you're 98% sure that Lucy Gray is alive. So what do you think ultimately happened to Lucy Gray? Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, well, I think that's the question of the century, right? For all of us Hunger Games and ballad fans. So I don't know. My guess is no better or worse than anyone else's, I guess. I mean, it's always fun to speculate. So that's the fun of novels and stories like this. And we always, of course, a lot of us always want the final answer at the end, right? But Suzanne Collins is not known for doing that. She leaves a lot of open doors, a lot of things hanging out there that we really need to know more about. But I tend to be pretty literal about things. When I look in canon, I look at what she and Coriolanus talk about, as they're starting their adventure in the woods, or even back when they're with the covey out at the lake. You start seeing clues that Lucy Gray is not going to be a survivor in the woods. She really would feel alone. She could go a few days, she thought, in the woods if she didn't have Coriolanus. But then she probably would just go back to District 12 and handle her problems there. I mean, her number one priority, she makes very clear, is protecting the covey. And very, very similar to what Katniss was doing to protect Prim, right? That was her number one goal for staying alive. And so it makes sense that Lucy Gray is not going to abandon the covey that soon. Maybe she does disappear for a while and let them be on their own. She knows they can handle themselves. So she knows she is not entirely necessary in their survival, but that's her number one concern. And I kind of like this pun. I think she goes back to face the music, so to speak, in District 12 to deal with the mayor, just because there's a mayor coming after her, watching her house. I don't know. That's not a reason to disappear forever. Who knows? My sense is they don't have a long future in District 12, though, because you don't see many people in the trilogy knowing much about their heritage. So my guess is they leave and end up going somewhere else.
I think for us, it seems like based off the poem that she's named after, that character, that Lucy Gray, dies, or at least that's how we interpret that poem, is that she dies. So in lining up with that, I guess that's why we think that she doesn't make it.
Okay, so and that's a good point. One of the pieces of evidence that people point to, rightly, as you're doing, is the Wordsworth poem. Okay, and I have my students analyze this as well. We actually go word for word. It really only takes about 5 minutes to see how Suzanne Collins changed the words of the poem.
Right.
And it's
Mhm.
still, the meaning is very similar to what Wordsworth had in mind. It's kind of funny, some of the words that she took out. I think she realized people aren't going to realize or understand many of those different English
Like
words
old
that
sayings.
Americans, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that Americans aren't going to pick up. They're like, what? So anyway, yeah, she wrote it for the purpose of the readership. So here's the thing about the Wordsworth poem. So Wordsworth did not write that with the intent that the little girl dies at the end. Instead, she disappears. She does not die. Matter of
True.
fact, she keeps the poem's meaning similar to what Wordsworth had in mind. Wordsworth, from the research I've done, his sister told him that story, which was his inspiration for writing that poem or that lyrical ballad in the first place, where the story told by his sister involves a little girl that the parents let out. She disappeared in the snow, and her trail ends at a lock of a canal. This was an actual story that his sister had relayed to him, to William Wordsworth, back in the late 1700s or whatever. And they actually did find the body of that child in the canal, right? So they actually did. So that child dies. The story that inspires his poem is one where they actually found the child passed away, unfortunately. He changes the poem. So when he writes his poem, he leaves it open at the end. The child disappears, whistling in the wind, the footprints disappear. It might be a ghost floating in the breeze. We don't know. That's the way I read Lucy Gray's experience, since of course her life is meant to model this ballad. That's kind of how I'm seeing it, is that, yeah, she disappears at the end of this book. It doesn't necessarily mean she passed away.
I'm very curious to see how, and I mean, that kind of leads into our last question, I guess, about what you're looking forward to in the film version most. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing how they're going to interpret the end with Lucy Gray on screen, and if they're going to hint to anything either way, her living or dying more, or try and leave it as ambiguous as possible.
Yeah, those are great questions about what to expect from the film. I'd be surprised if they don't leave it ambiguous, but I always get surprised by these things. I think even with Suzanne Collins as a mentor or a guide, I guess, for the Hollywood production, as she's been, I was very surprised at what they included or did not include, or totally changed the storyline. And of course, my students analyze a lot of that too, right? So some of that, anything is possible with something like this. I'm really looking forward to what they do with the music, in the sense that, this whole story is wrapped around a ballad itself. I mean, the whole book is essentially the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for a very specific reason. So it kind of runs like the story of a ballad. Ballads don't happen with happy endings very often, as tradition would have it in the Appalachians. And so the whole storyline that Suzanne Collins sets up is very similar to a traditional Appalachian ballad. I'll be very curious to see what they do with the music and the instrumentation, and how serious they take the kind of history of the music genres. So the early country music with Keep on the Sunny Side, and the Valley Song, of course, that's based on Down in the Valley, also known as Birmingham Jail, very popular early country music tune. That era when folk songs are being commodified by the recording industry, coming into the mountains and learning about these songs and having them be recorded for sale outside the mountain range. That was a very strong period of commodification, when the radio industry, the recording industry, comes into the mountains and records a lot of these folk songs. Anyway, that's the beginning of the early country music industry. I'll be curious to see if they take that seriously, or if the music just kind of ends up being a backdrop to the storyline itself. Now, one indication we have that they are taking the music seriously is who they have cast for Lucy Gray. Have you seen that?
Yes,
I'm sure you have.
Rachel Zegler.
Yeah, so Rachel Zegler, when I learned that, then that tells me that they're taking the music side of this seriously. Her role in West Side Story just recently, Hollywood discovered her for that role. And not unlike Jennifer Lawrence, in her early part of her career, they kind of discovered her and elevated her to this role. So they have a very serious singer, person who sings professionally, coming in to play Lucy Gray. And that tells me there's going to be a lot of song, a lot of music. And I'll be looking very much forward to see how they portray the covey with the instrumentation and and the bluegrass style of music. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope it doesn't just become a backdrop.
Yeah,
Ballad
I
the
hope so.
musical, right? We always joke
Yeah.
about that. And then you had a section in your book joking about that as well, but like saying it's not,
Mhm.
it's kind of the reality, which I think it is.
It's kind of an interesting idea. Now, my students, when I breached that idea last year, they would have none of it. They were just laughing, like, no. You can't have something as serious as the Hunger Games turn into a musical. Well, I'm thinking, well, how about Les Mis? Or a lot of others
True.
out there.
Yeah.
So you can do serious topics using kind of the Broadway genre, but we'll see what they do with this. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Well, thank you for this amazing discussion. It's been such an honor
Mhm.
having you on our show.
Yeah, this is great.
A place called District 12.
Yeah.
Check it out. We'll link it down below.
Okay.
And thank you. I don't know if you have any other thoughts or anything else you'd like to share.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you're keeping the stories alive as well with this podcasts and your YouTube
Thanks.
video.
Well, you
that's
as
connected to
well.
it. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun. So we've made it through that 10 years, right, without much Hunger Games, and now we're back in business again.
Yes.
Yep. The year of ballad. We're
So,
ready.
Well, good. We'll keep having fun with it, and it was fun to be a part of your show. So thank you for doing that.
Everyone listening, join us for Tribute Talk this Thursday. We're reading chapters 7 and 8 of Ballad. So if you're interested, I think this was a lot of ballad talk. Come read with us.
All right. Thank you both.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye-bye.